right. Welcome to Parenting Problems Today. And we have a topic that comes up a lot in family systems and dynamics today. So we're kind of excited about this episode. In fact, this comes from a parent from our community that's working with us. And what we're going to talk about today are siblings in a mental health dynamic within the family container. So, for example, some of the things that come up is, let's say an older sibling has an anxiety disorder or autism, or is going through a depressive or suicidal episode, or is hospitalized for some reason, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Whatever the mental health kind of track is within the family, it's going to impact the entire family. It's not just like, oh, what do we do for this kid? This kid is struggling. This kid doesn't want to go to school. They're not doing their homework. They're not listening. They're stuck in autism loop about black and white thinking. They're attention-seeking behaviors. They're cutting, whatever it is. It doesn't matter. What comes up very often is the afterthought, usually an afterthought, not always, where as a family works through a progress of like, okay, therapy, treatment, changing family dynamics, whatever it might be, suddenly they're in this place of like, oh, hold on, there's a brother or a sister or three brothers, or in my largest case, a family of 13 total with one kid that had autism diagnosed, and the whole family system had to shift. And there was so much work around the siblings needing support, but also, for me at least, to be invited into the know, to know what's happening at a level appropriate to their age. So today, join us in this conversation, and this might be the first of a conversation in a series, honestly, as we kind of get more in depth, etc. But let's call today an introduction to sibling work and the process of integrating them into a mental health process for the family that's going through some kind of therapeutic work, right? All right. Well, today you have myself, Robert Trout, and Paul Arredondo, two of the primary coaches with Parent Trainers, and we're going to talk about this subject. So, Paul, let's jump right into it. What comes to mind, because we deal with this every day, every single day with families. So I just want to jump to you immediately. First thoughts when siblings come into the picture when we're trying to stabilize the family system. What comes up?
Yeah, I mean, what I'll first say is a reiteration of what you opened with, which is the siblings get lost, and they fade into the background. And some of that is that their self-protection, right? And some of it is also they don't want to be in the spotlight. They're happy to be in the background, right? Because they see the dynamic that's happening with the sibling who is struggling and the parents who are racking their brain and trying to keep themselves grounded enough to manage the situation. And so if sister or brother can just keep doing what they're doing, then everything's going to be fine while I deal with this one, right?
Right.
And so being able to, engage the sibling, or in fact, engage more than you think you actually need to, is the better way to say that. Recognizing that that child is witnessing, and one of the things that I say to every single parent that I work with is your kids are listening.
All of
They're hearing everything you say and you don't say, and they're watching everything you do and you don't do. Okay.
Yep.
So when you're engaging the child who needs attention, there's something you're not doing, right?
Yeah.
You're not engaging the child who might actually still need support because they might be isolating in their room and hearing banging and putting on noise canceling headphones, or stories of kids locking themselves in the closet for fear of physical violence. I mean, the stories come and go. And I mean, geez, it's
Yeah.
challenging for any family system. That being said, what does the conversation look like, right? How do you actually support the sibling without parentifying them,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Because if that child with a mental health challenge is struggling, then there's obviously judgment happening by every other family member, right? There's no way around it. Judgment happens. It's a humanistic trait. We judge. And in this case, the judgment is about, how do I create safety? How do I manage the situation? How do I keep doing what I need to do? And how do I have a relationship with each person in the family in the recognition of this bigger dynamic, right? That is taking up a lot of space,
Yeah.
right? And so creating the opportunity to have that conversation around, how are you feeling? Just such a basic question, right?
Right.
What's your sense of this situation? What would you need in terms of support? And creating the space for a richer dialogue that allows them to feel like they have a voice. Because if the child is left off in the shadows or isolated in the room, or they're leaving the house and they only come back to eat and fall asleep, because that's also something that, siblings do, is they're like, I'm out of here, right?
Yep.
Uh, if that's their only experience or their only understanding is to escape or leave, and they're still not clear what the dynamic is, that's a problem,
Yep.
right? Because the suffering that occurs in that lack of connection, that lack of conversation, is that they don't really get to know their sibling. They don't get to know your intention around how you're being with their sibling, right? Because they might just be hearing screaming and yelling. They might
Yep.
just be hearing like banging and, you know, all the other things that happen off in the distance in a house. You
Yep.
want to say something,
Well,
Rob?
I want to add one to that. It's not just about escaping and leaving. So any parent that's listening to this, there are so many, I mean, a vast array of reactions, okay, including fighting for their own attention in the
Certainly.
dynamic. So it's not, basically, it's about looking at the personality of each individual in the family system. And I can't stress that enough, where the system and the interactions within that system shape the reactions and behaviors of everyone, parent and child, sibling, whoever's in it. They're all working off of each other to develop coping mechanisms and strategies for getting their needs met. So,
Right.
just to give some examples, looking at a family that they're fighting with this one child, and we look at that and say, okay, that child's going through a mental health process or a diagnosis or neurological process that the family is trying to cope with, and the parents usually are the ones taking the brunt of trying to find order and structure so that we can all live together, right? Well, very often I've actually seen where the parents turn around and they look at the other child or children, and they're shaping their behaviors as well. Because, for example, they might turn and say, "Oh, thank God you're not like your brother. You're the good child. I don't have to worry about you at all." Holy anxiety disorder that's on the way, because that kid is sitting there being like, I can't mess up. I'm the
Right.
one that's supposed to be perfect. I'm etc. And I can't tell you how many times we've run into that. I mean, you and I talked about one of those families this morning. It's like,
Right.
oh yeah, like I can't do anything. I need to just sit here and take it, like etc. That's one example. Other things are where the parents use all of their energy on the kid that needs all of the attention, and then they just ignore the other kids because their behaviors might be more secretive or less mental health focused and more behavioral focused. Where the
Or the
parents are
parents
just
don't
like,
just have the bandwidth.
that's right. They're exhausted, which no judgment. I hope no one hears
Right.
any judgment in this. What we're talking about is recognizing that the container is developing into a self-flowing model. And it's not usually till much later that we find parents that are hiring us to do trainings and do sessions with them and help them kind of, okay, stop where things are going and reframe and rebuild so that it becomes a functional system again. But the siblings get lost, they get ignored, they get developed into their own thing that's very different than the first thing that the parents were super worried about with the other kid, but will have to deal with later. So there's really a recognition here where the parents need to stop and look at the entire container and say, what are we saying and doing behaviorally ourselves that's causing a process to happen for the siblings, younger or older? Doesn't matter. Everyone in the system gets impacted by what's happening in that system. So there is that stop and assess and figure out, like, not only do I need to do things differently with this kid that I know is struggling, but I also need to turn and say, okay, maybe I invite these siblings in. That's always something that we look at as a possibility. Kids that are old enough, right? So we're looking for age appropriate to say, hey, you can help with this. I'm going to give you a role in stabilizing the family and teach you how to do that effectively. Kids thrive in roles. And if a parent trusts them enough to give them responsibility, it usually develops into a pattern where it's a really great positive coping mechanism for them to realize they have value within a relational system. And young kids, so for me, 8 to 10 is where there's a little space for conversation. 10 and up, there's definitely space for role development and figuring out how to educate them about what's going on for their sibling that we know is going through a mental health process. What do you
Mhm.
think about that? Will you agree with that? What's your range?
I agree with that range, and I think the major focus is what's developmentally appropriate to speak to the sibling about, right?
Yeah.
And use simple language, right?
Yep.
Your brother, it's hard for him to take in new information, and he just needs some time to be able to understand it, rather than saying something like his processing speed is delayed due to the neurological blah 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 blah, right?
Yeah.
Like creating the space to have a clear conversation so that they understand that again, part of their role is to create space, maybe slow down, understand that the reaction that's happening is the placeholder for the processing, right? And creating some of those psychoeducation pieces for your child. And of course, reach out to us and we can help unpack that in terms of what's specific to the challenge, because we're talking through ASD right now. That, I mean, even if you're talking about anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, there's all sorts of different ways to have that conversation with a sibling so that, again, they feel like they're getting support, because having a role is one aspect, but then also encouraging them to claim a process for themselves. What do I do to take care of myself when I see that my parents are working with or trying to support my sibling? What can I empower myself to do, or who can I access if my parents aren't available? Like, what are my skills, who are my support systems, and what environment can I actually like transition towards if in fact I don't feel safe, or if I've been told it's inappropriate for me to stick around because my brother, if I'm witnessing, he just stays agitated, right? Because if you take away the audience, right, that's one of those rules of thumb: take away the audience when it
Yes.
comes to supporting any mental health crisis, right? And so being able to be clear about those things and set up a plan, because the more you have that dialogue about the plan, the more you refine that plan, then the more they're going to feel held, and then the more the agitation in their system, be it anxiety or starting to lean towards vicarious trauma, or the deeper aspects of the impact that could occur if the behaviors get bigger and bigger, right, that they witness or that they end up being an unwilling participant in.
Yep. Yeah, there's so many dynamics here. That's why I said maybe this is just part one of this conversation, because we're really opening a giant category where parents struggle. For example, the one of the first things that we do need to touch on is that as parents recognize that they're struggling with the kid that's identified as like, oh, we know something's wrong here, usually those parents themselves end up in some form of either our work, coaching and training, where they're learning skills and developing the techniques to intervene and change the process, etc., or they're in therapy. And I hope whoever the therapist is they choose, they're developing skills as well. Where the skill comes from, there does need, in my opinion, there should always be a recognition that when a parent learns a new skill, they need to then adjust it to their strengths and figure out like, oh, I can say it like this and do it like this and kind of tweak it so that it's really it's me. I'm showing up. It's not just me practicing something. It's me being in the space to facilitate a process for my loved one, my child that's struggling. But then secondary to that, so many parents miss the message there of like, and all the siblings need a variety of this too. This skill is not just for you. This is for the whole system. So grandparents, siblings, uncles, who aunts, whoever's there, this needs to be spread. So once you learn it, you become the teacher. So the siblings are looking to you to develop coping mechanisms, communication strategies, processes to intervene and take care of themselves. Self-care, right? I know it's a repetitive thing, but like how to take care of yourself when someone else is struggling. And developing that sense of, okay, the whole system supports the process for this individual that is struggling at a higher level. That's where everything gets easier. It's not just like, oh, I know what to do. I'll always be the person to step in and do this. We need to spread that across the board into the whole family system. But very often it can't be taught to a 10-year-old the same way it was taught to you. So it's taking what you know and beginning to teach them, knowing that it's going to be a struggle for them to develop the skill. But a couple of years of trying and being reinforced that like you can communicate differently, you can intervene differently, you can walk away, you can to do this to get prepared for being with your sibling later. You can build a relationship by changing how you're interacting in this way to be in this way, and targeting that as a relational goal. Kids don't usually think that way. It's like, wait a minute, what's a relational goal? It's like, well, do you want to always fight with your sibling, or would you like to have at least something that you can build a positive interaction around? Like, oh, I'd like at least one thing. They usually say that. Great, let's build that. So you support the whole family developing the hold for not just the kid that's struggling the most, but also you as a parent. If the siblings can help and not participate in setting off a lot of the tension and fights and arguments and stress level in the home, if they support that, your stress level goes down and the need for your interaction as a parent goes down. We are literally talking about stabilizing the entire family system, and that ultimately should be the goal.
And there's a hard balance to strike here when we talk about inviting the siblings into a process. Because really,
Mhm.
what's happening is, to a certain degree, you're telling your other children, hey, we need to change for the sake of this one family member. And
Yeah.
ultimately, there can be some frustration and anger and confusion and sadness and a grieving process. And you might see behaviors from that sibling start to get a little bit bigger because they don't want to compromise their time at the TV. They don't want to compromise the access to a parent. They don't want to compromise. What do you mean my friend can't come over? Right. And so creating the space for them to not only understand, but to also create the space for them to actually
Mhm.
have, some sense of normalcy, and so these are the strategies that again focus back on, the child with the challenge or the mental health crises or the diagnosis that you're trying to wrap your head around, getting them out of the house, getting them into
Yeah.
an activity, creating the space for the other siblings, right? So think about it through all these different facets of, how do I not only prepare the sibling for a deeper understanding and actionable steps and a role, but how do I create space for that sibling to have a childhood,
Yeah.
right? To not parentify them, to not
Yep.
make them more than responsible than they should actually be.
Yes.
So again, it's a hard balance and it's a continued conversation and developmentally, as you said, Rob, as they age up, there might be more value in handing them responsibility or having a deeper conversation about, what those challenges are and how the behaviors are related to neurological function and so on and so forth. But to start, think of it from a very basic lens of take space for yourself.
Yes.
Take space and go have experiences with neuronormative friends and kids and family members. Give them the opportunity to cultivate relationships outside the family system that help them feel supported so that they have some normal sense of what healthy behavior looks like. Because I've seen it time and time again with these siblings. They see these behaviors in the household, and that becomes a normalized expectation of other households. And then it's actually really disorienting for them to go to other households, right? Or go have experiences interpersonally within their friend system. So there are layers, many, many layers to unpack. And again, this is a very top level, kind of starting to crack the lid open on this conversation, but worth thinking about, worth considering.
Yeah. Well, as we get a little deeper into this conversation, there's that fine line that you're talking about of not parentifying. And let's kind of define that for the listener. There
Sure.
are situations where the child becomes so, I'm going to say, overburdened by the responsibility of caring for their sibling that they lose their own childhood and free will and process. It's this weight emotionally that gets put on them, and at least from my experience, usually leads to I'm going to say a non-coping strategy later because they didn't have the room to grow through their own developmental process outside of the weight of the responsibility of caring for their sibling. What would you add to that for the listener?
I think, yeah, I would echo what you'd say and just reinforce the value of connectivity and the value of the conversation, the value of checking in, and the value of making sure that the siblings are getting therapy, right?
Yeah,
And we talked a little earlier about skills. Hopefully the parent is learning skills. Hopefully those skills are being transferred and transmitted to the siblings and extended family members. Give that kid an opportunity to go and vent to somebody who isn't, an immediate family member. Give that kid an opportunity to go process and have some perspective of somebody outside the system. Create the space for them to stabilize or understand what stabilizing actually is through skill building and that reflective process.
yeah,
So that idea of wraparound support, and as you said, Rob, it isn't just around that individual with the mental health challenges, because oftentimes in more families than not, there's more than one mental health crisis. There
yeah,
are more than one person in the system is struggling on some level or another, even if it's just grief,
yep,
right? And like depression because of what they're trying to face and manage, and just the exhaustion can lead to that, right? And so creating the understanding of, hey, let's re-up our self-care practices. Let's get the basics down, right? When it comes to the siblings, it's like, are they getting good sleep? Are they getting good nutrition? Are they hydrating? Are they getting exercise? Because if those basic four things are not held by everybody in the family system, dysregulation is just going to be commonplace, right?
yeah.
So as much as we're talking about support across the board, you got to start with the healthy foundations, and then build from there.
So let's kind of back off a little bit from the big topic and let's see if we can come up with some specifics for siblings. Okay, so we're stepping away from the parents and the kid. If we're looking at specifics for siblings, and you're a parent out there listening to this, here are some basic ideas of stepping in to work with the sibling. The first you've heard a few times. Stop and have conversation with the sibling and develop the skill of realizing that they might lie to you, they might everything's fine. You don't have to worry about me. Like there might already be some developed patterns that you'll need to build relationship first. Build relationship first to open the door where they're actually talking with you about the struggle of living with you and this other individual that's struggling and what's coming up for them. So stop, build relationship, and open the door for conversation would be my first go to piece to that or rule. Let's call them rules. What are the six rules, Paul? Let's create them right now, off the cuff. One, stop, assess, build relationship, and get them to the place where the sibling feels safe enough to speak with you. That would be rule number one for me. What would
Mm-hmm.
you say rule number two is?
I would say get curious about what they actually would like in terms of support, right? And support can be, again, a plan, and it could be scheduled time one-on-one with them, right?
Yeah.
So that they feel your presence, right? Because they have a story about who you are, whether you're there or you're not, right? So being able to show up and be present with them, even if it's like, hey, let's go get some tea. Let's go get a snack. Let's go come shopping with me and you can pick dinner tonight. Whatever it is, get one-on-one time with them, right? And it doesn't have to be a time where you process. It's just co-regulation, share space, talk about nonsensical things or what have you. It's not about having a process, air quotes, process. It's about connection and then feeling your presence. So curiosity about supports and plan, and then also presence. I would say that's number two.
Hey, I like it. Rule number 3, if I would throw something at the end of that, would be to recognize that each sibling needs a role for the family system. They can't just be left to figure it out. They need to be their personality, their skills need to be developed into a strength for the family system. And that's not always with you. If you recognize that your child has a strength in art or creative processes, or heck, in therapeutic, like relational work and connecting with others or making friends or whatever it might be, you develop those skills and recognize that you don't have to be the one doing it, but you do have to support it. Get them into the right scenarios, because that this sibling is also going to individuate through their growth process of being a teenager and figuring out who they are and trying on the personality hats that they're going to try on. So give them a role, develop their strengths, and recognize that you don't have to be the one doing it. That would be rule number 3 for me. Rule 4.
You know, how many do we want to give? Because I
I
mean,
want
that's already a
6. I
handful.
think 6 is a good number. What do you
Okay.
think?
I mean, we can keep going. So I would say rule 4 would be co-parent. Make sure you're on the same page with your co-parent around how you, or co-parent or co-caregiver. If you're a single parent in the household, who are the other adults that you can resource to support the sibling? Right?
Mm.
Tell them about the conversations you're having with the sibling. Make sure you're on the same page about what that sibling needs. Create the space for, at the very least, a side conversation, or maybe all of you sit down with the sibling so that, again, they feel held in the process. This is about that, again, I said earlier, skills, supports, environments. This is that supports part, right? Who else besides you as a parent, and of course your co-parent or co-caregiver, who can that sibling resource? Who do they feel safe with? Who can they go to? Even if it's just a neighbor, just to walk outside the door, go around to the other front yard, knock on the door and say, hey, can I hang out for a little bit? Set up systems of support. I'd say that's
That's
4.
awesome. Rule 5. Very simple. Do not create an us versus them.
Hmm.
So many times parents identify the child that's struggling and they blame them, not even like consciously. It's just our language and behaviors as we react to mental health processes, especially if a parent's not prepared. They don't know what they're doing and they're guessing, which is why we exist, is we help parents remove the guesswork. Well, guess what? You can't turn to the sibling and go, oh my God, your brother's so difficult. Us versus them breeds resentment and
Certainly.
gives permission for conflict.
And it gets
Parents need,
weaponized.
yes. And parents need to understand their role in that. That if you develop language of us versus them, it will create conflict 100% across the board in some way, because the sibling will develop the individuation where they recognize that they can get what they want if they can get maybe you distracted to go back over there. Don't pay attention to me, or give me what I want because I'm the good kid and that's the bad kid. Like, recognize that a big part of this, so rule 5, is do your best to create a we challenge to the processes of living as a family without creating I'm venting to you, the sibling, or I'm giving you the emotional vomit that I need to, because I can't go over here and maybe I don't have that partner at home, or adult that I've built a relationship with, or I'm not in therapy, or etc. So many dynamics play into this, but just think about it when you're thinking of this concept. Us versus them is not the goal, and that's rule 5. All right, final rule. What do you think?
I would say is brainstorm with the sibling what sort of activities they'd like to do with their brother or sister,
Yes, build
so that
relationship.
so
We're on
that
the
they
same
can so
page.
that they can build relationship. Because ultimately, if they don't have some sort of contrived thing to focus on, or they don't have a thing that they enjoy doing together, it's going to be very hard for them to relate.
Absolutely.
Creating the space for them to have an opportunity to build rapport, have an opportunity to share a laugh, or at the very least relax. It could be watching a movie, right? That's good because in silence, both focused in the same direction, sharing space quietly, maybe that's as good as it gets, right?
Yep.
And so creating the space for them to have an opportunity to just be in an environment where they can just be with each other and not have it evolve into conflict or stress, right? So
Yeah.
figure out what those activities are, because their relationship, it's going to need to be nurtured, right? Because they're
Yeah.
going to be confused and frustrated with each other. And so cultivating that is, yeah, it needs intention.
I guess my last comment as we finish with that is recognize that they're not going to get along all the time. Developing relationship doesn't mean they're best friends. It's
Right.
just literally like sometimes it's just about getting that one thing. Like you said, that one thing that they share that they like and connect over. That's it. That's all you're ever going to get. So then it's about helping each individuate and not weighing down the system because they're both getting their needs met. All of them are getting their needs met the best that you can do. And again, remove judgment. So many parents are like, oh my God, I'm failing both kids. It's like, no, you're not. You just need to develop the skills, the structure, the boundaries, and the processes and intervention. And to be honest, let's go all the way back to the beginning. The assessment to see all of these kids as individuals and work with what you have to develop a system that can flow and work together. That's that relation.
Yeah, and what I will add on as a fine point to what you just said, Rob, is your family is playing the long game.
Yes.
This is not a quick fix. Just
Nope.
because you know doesn't mean that everything should snap into order, right? The change that you're looking to make from even just the 6 suggestions, even if you just take 2 of those suggestions
Yeah.
and run with them, that is going to take intentionality and time, because
Yeah.
change is hard, because
Yeah.
patterns are rooted. They're patterns for a lot of reasons, right? And so creating the space to understand, how do those patterns form and how do we unpack them? That takes support. That takes support sometimes from somebody who's really outside the system to look at it and go, hey, let's talk about clarity of language as just a focused conversation for the parent to go, oh, yeah, right. I need to hone in on this, that, or the other. So, get the support you need. If it's not from us, talk to your therapist, talk to your community organizers, talk to your child's therapist. Create the space for a dialogue to, wrap your head around strategies to gradually implement these changes. Because again, the whiplash of trying to force it all at once is going to be met with resistance. And yeah, that's just the nature of it. So
Yeah.
give yourself some grace, give your kids some grace, and recognize it's going to take a little bit of time.
Very good. Well, for all the families listening, we hope this was helpful and at least started you thinking. Like, let's just join the conversation. Okay. There's a process of recognizing what we're good at and not good at, what we know and what we don't know. It's that assessment of self as well. So if you enjoyed this episode, come find us and join our community at parenttrainers.com. Ask questions, give us podcast ideas, share your story, get some coaching and training from us if that's what would be helpful. But we look forward to supporting all the families that are listening and hope this helps you figure out a new direction for something that you're trying to work with within your family.